Richard Sterling pulls into his circular driveway, the gravel crunching beneath the wheels of his black Tesla Model S. He's returned 3 days early from his Singapore business trip, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders after closing a $40 million deal. The mansion looms before him, all glass and steel angles catching the afternoon sun, a monument to his success in the tech world. At 42, Richard has built sterling tech from a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire, but the cost has been steep. The loss of his wife Sarah to cancer 2 years ago still haunts every corner of this house. He expects silence, perhaps the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Emma playing in her room. Instead, as he steps through the front door, he hears voices from the living room. His 6-year-old daughter's voice, broken by sobs, and another voice responding in gentle, soothing tones. Richard's jaw tightens as he recognizes the second voice. Grace Washington, the black woman he hired as Emma's nanny 18 months ago. Moving quietly toward the sound, Richard stops short at the archway leading to the living room. The scene before him sends a jolt of alarm through his chest. Grace sits on the white leather sofa, Emma curled in her lap, the child's face buried against Grace's shoulder. Grace's arms wrap protectively around Emma, one hand stroking the little girl's blonde hair, while she whispers something Richard can't quite make out. "Shh, baby girl," Grace murmurs, her voice carrying that slight southern lilt that Richard has always found unsettling. "You don't listen to those mean children. You are smart and beautiful and worthy of love. You hear me? Your mama is watching over you, and she's so proud of the little lady you're becoming." Richard's hands clench into fists at his sides. What right does this woman have to invoke Sarah's memory? What is she filling his daughter's head with? The sight of Emma so completely dependent on this stranger, this employee, sends a wave of possessive fury through him. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice cuts through the tender moment like a blade. Both Grace and Emma startle. Emma's tear-stained face turns toward her father, confusion and fear flickering across her features. Grace immediately moves to set Emma aside, her posture shifting to one of professional distance. "Mr. Sterling," Grace begins, standing quickly and smoothing down her simple blue dress. "I didn't expect you back until—" "I can see that." Richard's voice is ice cold, his grey eyes fixed on Grace with an intensity that makes her take a step back. "Emma, go to your room. Now." "But Daddy, Grace was just—" "Now, Emma." The sharpness in his tone makes the little girl flinch. She looks between her father and Grace, her lower lip trembling, before running from the room. Grace stands alone now, her chin lifted despite the tremor Richard can see in her hands. At 34, she carries herself with a dignity that he's always found somehow threatening, as if she doesn't quite know her place in his world. "Mr. Sterling, if you'll let me explain—" "Explain what? That I come home to find you crossing every professional boundary I can imagine? That my daughter is clinging to you like—" He stops himself, but the unspoken words hang in the air between them. Grace's eyes narrow slightly. "Like what, Mr. Sterling?" The question hangs there, loaded with implications neither of them wants to voice. Richard's face flushes, anger and something else. Something that feels uncomfortably like shame, warring in his chest. "You're done here," he says finally. "Pack your things. I want you out of my house within the hour." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracks for just a moment, revealing the hurt beneath. "Sir, please, if you would just listen—" "There's nothing to listen to." Richard is already reaching for his wallet, pulling out a thick fold of bills. Here's your severance. More than generous, I think you'll agree. But I want you gone, and I don't want you coming back." Grace stares at the money in his outstretched hand, her shoulders squaring. "I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling. I want to know why you're doing this. Emma needs—" "Don't you dare tell me what my daughter needs!" The words come out as a snarl. "You're the help, nothing more, and you've forgotten your place." The silence that follows is deafening. Grace looks at him for a long moment, and Richard sees something die in her eyes. The hurt transforms into something harder, more resigned. "Yes, sir," she says quietly. "I understand perfectly now." Within 30 minutes, Grace Washington is gone. The sound of her 15-year-old Honda Civic fading down the long driveway. Richard stands at his living room window, watching the tail lights disappear, and tries to ignore the sound of Emma crying in her room upstairs. He tells himself he's done the right thing, protected his daughter from inappropriate influence, maintained proper boundaries in his household. But as the silence settles over his mansion like a shroud, Richard Sterling can't shake the feeling that he's just made the biggest mistake of his life. Richard Sterling built his fortune on calculated decisions, on reading people and situations with laser precision. But standing in his empty living room, watching Emma's bedroom door remain stubbornly closed 3 hours after Grace's departure, he's beginning to wonder if his personal instincts are as sharp as his business ones. Grace Washington came into their lives through an agency that specialized in household professionals for discerning families. Her resume was impeccable. A bachelor's degree in early childhood education from Howard University, 5 years of experience with high net worth families, glowing references, and a background check that came back cleaner than most CEOs Richard knew. She was professional, competent, and best of all, she didn't treat Emma like a fragile china doll the way every other nanny had. The first few months had been a revelation. Emma, who had barely spoken above a whisper since Sarah's death, began laughing again. She started eating full meals instead of picking at her food. Her nightmares became less frequent, and she stopped asking when Mommy was coming home. Richard should have been grateful. He was grateful in his more honest moments. But something about the easy intimacy between Grace and Emma made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was the way Emma's face lit up when Grace arrived each morning, the way she ran to Grace's arms instead of his. Maybe it was the fact that Grace seemed to understand Emma's moods and needs better than he did, despite being a stranger to their family. Or maybe it was something darker, something Richard didn't want to examine too closely. The way his neighbors' conversations seemed to pause when they saw Grace pushing Emma on the swing set. The way his mother's voice got that particular tone when she asked about the help. Richard had grown up in suburban Connecticut, in a world where diversity meant having a Jewish neighbor and cultural awareness meant knowing which fork to use for the salad course. His parents weren't overtly racist. They were too educated, too sophisticated for slurs or Confederate flags. But their prejudices were woven into the fabric of their world view like expensive thread, invisible until you looked closely. Grace lived in South End, a predominantly black neighborhood that might as well have been on another planet from Westfield. She took 2 buses and walked 6 blocks to reach the Sterling mansion each morning, a 90-minute journey that she made without complaint. She never asked for overtime pay for the extra hours, never complained when Richard's business trips ran long, never made him feel guilty for leaving Emma in her care while he built his empire. Emma had blossomed under Grace's attention in ways that made Richard both grateful and resentful. Grace helped with homework, turning math problems into games and reading sessions into adventures. She taught Emma to braid her hair and paint her nails, to plant seeds in the garden and watch them grow. She answered Emma's endless questions about death and heaven, and whether Mommy could see her from wherever she'd gone, with a patience and wisdom that Richard couldn't match. The other parents at Emma's private school were polite about Grace, but Richard caught the subtle glances, the carefully neutral expressions when Grace picked Emma up for doctor's appointments or school events. The headmistress had made a point of mentioning the school's diverse scholarship program and how important it was for children to interact with different types of people in appropriate settings. The message was clear. Charity was commendable, but boundaries were essential. These thoughts had been swirling in Richard's mind for weeks before the incident that led to Grace's dismissal. He'd been in Singapore, negotiating a complex merger, when Emma's school had called. She'd been in a fight with another student, they said. Nothing serious, but concerning enough to warrant a parent conference when he returned. Richard had cut his trip short, flying back in a haze of worry and anger. As his plane crossed the Pacific, he'd built scenarios in his mind, each one featuring Grace as the corrupting influence, filling Emma's head with ideas about fairness and justice that had no place in a 6-year-old's world. Now, 3 hours later, Richard sits in his study surrounded by the trappings of his success. Through the window, he can see Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor, tending to her roses in the garden that borders their property. She waves when she catches sight of him, and he waves back automatically, wondering what she thought of the scene earlier when Grace left with tears in her eyes and Emma's cries echoing from the upstairs windows. Emma hasn't emerged from her room since he sent her there. The new nanny from the agency won't arrive until Monday, which means Richard will have to take time off work to care for his daughter, time he can't afford with the Singapore deal still pending. The inconvenience irritates him, but not as much as the growing suspicion that he's handled this situation poorly. At 12:47 a.m., Richard finally climbs the curved staircase to the second floor. Emma's door is painted white with silver hardware, a nameplate spelling out Emma's room in curly script that Sarah had chosen. Richard presses his ear to the wood and hears nothing, then turns the handle slowly. Instead of finding his daughter asleep, Emma sits at her small white desk, crayons scattered across the surface, working on something by the light of her bedside lamp. She doesn't look up when he enters, just continues coloring with fierce concentration. "Em, baby, what are you doing awake?" No response. Emma's blonde hair falls in waves around her face, hiding her expression as she bears down on whatever she's creating. Richard moves closer, his heart clenching when he sees what she's drawing. Stick figures that are unmistakably herself and Grace, holding hands under a rainbow, with "I miss you" written in shaky 6-year-old handwriting across the top. "Emma, sweetheart, it's very late. You need to get some sleep." She finally looks up, and the expression on her face stops Richard cold. It's not the tearful devastation he expected, not the angry defiance he might have understood. Instead, Emma looks at him with something that might be pity, the kind of look a wise old woman might give a foolish child. "Why did you send Grace away?" Her voice is small but steady, no tears left to cry. Richard crouches beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Honey, Grace was overstepping her boundaries. She was getting too involved in our family business." "What's boundaries? How do you explain the invisible lines that separate employer from employee, professional from personal, us from them?" "Boundaries are rules about how people should act with each other. Grace was hired to take care of you, but she was acting like..." "Like what, Daddy?" Like family, Richard thinks but doesn't say. Like she loved you. Like she belonged here. Like more than she was supposed to be. He finishes weakly. Emma considers this, a small face serious in the lamplight. Grace loves me. I know she cares about you, sweetheart, but… No. Emma's voice has a firmness that reminds Richard uncomfortably of Sarah. Grace loves me. Like Mommy loved me. She told me so. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. What right did Grace have to make such declarations? What right did she have to position herself as a mother figure in Emma's life? Emma, Grace is not your mother. She was an employee, someone Daddy paid to take care of you. That's very different from love. Emma slides off her chair and walks to her bookshelf, pulling out a photo album that Richard doesn't recognize. She flips through pages filled with pictures, Emma and Grace at the park, at the zoo, baking cookies in the kitchen, reading stories on the couch. When did Grace take all these photos? When did she compile them into this album that looks disturbingly like a family scrapbook? Grace made this for me, Emma says, showing him a page titled, Our Adventures Together. She said even when people go away, we can remember the happy times, like with Mommy. Richard stares at the album, each photo a tiny knife twisting in his chest. Here's Emma laughing as Grace pushes her on the swing. Here's Grace teaching Emma to plant tomatoes in the garden. Here's Emma asleep on Grace's shoulder during a movie night that Richard apparently knew nothing about. Daddy? Emma's voice pulls him back to the present. Are you going to find Grace and bring her back? No, sweetheart. Grace isn't coming back. Emma nods solemnly, as if she expected this answer. Then I'm going to find her myself when I get bigger. The matter-of-fact way she says it sends a chill through Richard. This isn't the tantrum of a spoiled child, or the bargaining of someone who doesn't understand finality. This is a promise, a statement of intent. Emma, you need to understand. I understand, Daddy. She climbs into her bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. You sent away the person who loves me most in the whole world, except for you and Mommy. And now she's gone, and I don't know if she's okay, and she doesn't know if I'm okay, and we're both sad, and it's all because of boundaries. She closes her eyes, dismissing him as effectively as any CEO ending a meeting. Can you turn off the light? I want to dream about Grace. The morning comes anyway, indifferent to Richard's regrets and sleepless night. At 10:43 a.m., Richard discovers that Emma has disappeared from the house. Panic propels him through a frantic search until Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor, reveals that Emma had come through their shared garden gate hours earlier, determined to find Grace. She seemed to know exactly where to go. Mrs. Henderson explains. Gave me an address in Southend like she'd memorized it. I couldn't let a 6-year-old wander the city alone, so I drove her myself. The drive to Southend takes 45 minutes in Richard's Tesla, the GPS leading him through increasingly unfamiliar neighborhoods. The pristine suburbs of Westfield give way to older developments, then to apartment complexes and corner stores, then to tree-lined streets filled with modest homes that have seen better decades. Grace's building is a 3-story walk-up with red brick facade and green shutters that have faded to the color of old moss. The small front yard is carefully maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and a children's bicycle chained to the front porch railing. It's not the projects Richard had unconsciously expected. It's just normal. From behind Grace's door, he can hear voices. Emma's bright chatter and Grace's deeper responses, punctuated by what sounds like laughter. Through the thin door, he can hear Emma's voice. And then I told Mrs. Henderson that I had to find you because Daddy made a big mistake and I needed to fix it. Your daddy didn't make a mistake, baby girl. Grace's voice responds, and Richard can hear the careful diplomacy in her tone. He was trying to protect you the best way he knows how. But you're not dangerous. You're the safest person I know. A pause. Then Grace's voice, quieter now. Sometimes grown-ups see danger where there isn't any, Emma. Sometimes they get scared of things they don't understand. Richard finally knocks, the sound sharp and intrusive in the hallway. When the door opens, Grace is still wearing the blue dress from yesterday, though it's wrinkled now, and there are circles under her eyes. Mr. Sterling. Her voice is carefully neutral. Emma is safe. I was just about to call you. Emma appears behind Grace, her small hand slipping into the woman's larger one. Hi, Daddy. I found Grace all by myself. Well, Mrs. Henderson helped, but I was very brave. We need to go home, Emma, he says finally. I know. Emma hugs Grace tightly, her arms barely reaching around the woman's waist. But I had to tell Grace that I love her, and that I'm going to find her again when I'm bigger and can make my own decisions about boundaries. Grace kneels down to Emma's level, cupping the little girl's face in her hands. I want you to know that taking care of you has been the greatest joy of my life. You are smart and brave and kind, and your mama would be so proud of the little lady you're becoming. Don't you ever forget that, you hear me? Emma pulls something from her backpack, the photo album from last night. I want you to have this, so you remember our adventures too. Grace takes the album with shaking hands, and this time she can't stop the tears from falling. I could never forget, baby girl. Never. The drive home is quiet, Emma staring out the window while Richard navigates through traffic. When they finally pull into their driveway, Emma unbuckles her seatbelt but doesn't get out. Daddy? Her voice is small. Do you think Grace is crying? Richard turns off the engine and sits in the sudden silence. I don't know, sweetheart. I think she is. And I think it's because she loves me and now she can't take care of me anymore, and she doesn't understand why. The simple accuracy of this statement hits Richard like a physical blow. Emma. It's okay, Daddy. I understand about boundaries now. They're like invisible walls that grown-ups build to keep people apart, even when keeping them apart makes everyone sad. That night, Emma eats half a grilled cheese sandwich and goes to bed without being asked. She doesn't cry, doesn't argue, doesn't plead for Grace to come back. She just accepts the new reality with a grace that makes Richard's chest ache. Standing in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep with tear stains on her cheeks and clutching the stuffed elephant that Grace gave her for her 6th birthday, Richard Sterling finally admits what he's been fighting since the moment he fired Grace Washington. He has made a terrible mistake, and he has no idea how to fix it. The next few days pass in a blur of inadequacy. The replacement nanny from the agency, Mrs. Patricia Cromwell, arrives Monday morning with impeccable credentials and the personality of wet cardboard. She's everything Grace wasn't. White, middle-aged, coldly professional, and completely incapable of reaching Emma on any meaningful level. Miss Emma should eat her vegetables, Mrs. Cromwell announces at dinner Tuesday night, her British accent making everything sound like a royal decree. Emma pushes the broccoli around her plate without enthusiasm. Grace always made vegetables fun. She said they were tiny trees, and I was a friendly giant taking care of the forest. That's imaginative, Mrs. Cromwell replies, with the kind of strained smile that suggests imagination is a character flaw to be corrected. The calls from Emma's school start Thursday. Emma isn't participating in class discussions. She's withdrawn during recess, sitting alone while other children play. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, requests a parent conference with diplomatic urgency. Emma has always been a bright, engaged student, Mrs. Rodriguez explains when Richard arrives Friday afternoon. But this week, it's like she's physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. Has there been a significant change at home? Richard looks through the classroom window at Emma, who sits at a small table working on a puzzle by herself, while other children play in the reading corner. She looks so small, so isolated, so utterly lost. "We had to let our nanny go," he says finally. Emma was quite attached to her. Children Emma's age form very strong attachments to their caregivers, especially when they've experienced loss. The sudden departure of someone they trust can feel like abandonment, even when it's not intended that way. "It wasn't abandonment," Richard says quickly. "It was a professional decision. Boundaries were being crossed. I'm sure you made the decision you felt was best for your family. But from Emma's perspective, someone she loved disappeared without explanation. That can be very traumatic for a child who's already dealing with the loss of her mother. The word traumatic hits Richard like a slap. That what he's done? Traumatized his already grieving daughter in the name of maintaining appropriate boundaries? That weekend, Richard takes Emma to her favorite places: the Children's Museum, the park where she likes to feed the ducks, the ice cream shop that makes her smile. But nothing works. Emma goes through the motions politely, thanks him appropriately, and maintains the kind of emotional distance that feels like a chasm between them. Sunday evening, as they sit in the living room where this whole mess started, Emma looks up from the book she's not really reading and asks the question Richard has been dreading. "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" The words pierce him like arrows. "What? No, sweetheart, why would you think that?" "Because first Mommy went away, and now Grace went away, and I'm the same person in both stories. Maybe there's something wrong with me that makes people leave." Richard is across the room and kneeling beside her chair before he realizes he's moved. "Emma, no, listen to me. Your mommy didn't leave because of anything you did. She got sick, and sometimes people get sick and die, and it's nobody's fault." "But Grace didn't die. You sent her away." "Yes, I did. But not because of anything you did wrong. Daddy made a mistake, a big mistake, because I was scared and I didn't understand something important." Emma looks at him with those wise eyes that remind him so much of Sarah. What didn't you understand? How does he explain unconscious bias to a 6-year-old? How does he admit that he fired Grace because she was black and loving and everything his privileged upbringing taught him to fear? "I didn't understand that love is more important than rules," he says finally. "I thought there were rules about who could love you and how much, and I was wrong. Grace loves you, Emma. She loves you so much, and I was stupid to think that was a bad thing. Can you call her and tell her you were wrong? Can you ask her to come back?" The hope in Emma's voice is almost unbearable. "I don't know if she'll want to come back, sweetheart. I hurt her feelings very badly. Sometimes when we hurt someone, they don't want to give us another chance. But you have to try, Daddy. You have to try really, really hard." That night, after Emma finally falls asleep, Richard sits in his study with his phone in his hands and Grace's number on the screen. His finger hovers over the call button for nearly an hour before he finally gathers the courage to press it. The phone rings once, twice, 3 times, then Grace's voice, cautious and tired. "Hello? Grace, it's Richard Sterling. Don't hang up, please. I need to talk to you." A long pause. "It's nearly midnight, Mr. Sterling. I know, I'm sorry. I couldn't sleep. Emma couldn't sleep. Nobody in this house has slept properly since you left." Another pause. "What do you want?" "I want to apologize. I want to admit that I was wrong, completely and totally wrong, and I want to ask if there's any chance you might consider coming back. Mr. Sterling." Grace's voice is soft, but there's steel underneath. You fired me. You accused me of inappropriate behavior. You threw money at me like I was something to be disposed of. And now you want me to come back because Emma is sad? No, I mean, yes, Emma is heartbroken. But that's not... I want you to come back because you're good for her. Because you love her, and she loves you, and I was an idiot to think that was wrong. I want you to come back because I've spent the last week watching my daughter fade away without you. And I finally understand that the only inappropriate thing in this situation was my behavior. Silence on the other end of the line. Richard holds his breath, waiting for judgment, for forgiveness, for the sound of the dial tone. I'll think about it, Grace says finally. But if I come back, things are going to be different. I'm not going to walk on eggshells around you, wondering if showing affection to Emma is going to get me fired again. I'm not going to pretend that what happened was okay, or that trust is something that can be rebuilt overnight. I understand. Whatever you need, whatever conditions you want to set, I'll agree to them. Don't make promises you can't keep, Mr. Sterling. You've already done that once. The line goes dead, leaving Richard alone with his regret, and the first fragile hope he's felt in days. Grace said she'd think about it. It's not yes, but it's not no either. It's a chance. Maybe the only chance he'll get to make this right. 3 days later, Grace Washington walks back through the front door of the Sterling mansion. Emma's scream of joy can probably be heard in the next county. The reunion between Emma and Grace is everything Richard hoped it would be, and more painful than he expected. Emma runs to Grace with the desperate intensity of someone who thought she'd lost everything, and Grace catches her with arms that shake with their own relief. They hold each other in the foyer, both crying, both laughing, both completely absorbed in the miracle of being together again. "Welcome back," Richard says when they finally separate, and Grace nods at him with cautious politeness. "Thank you for having me back, Mr. Sterling." "Richard," he corrects. "Please, I think we're past formalities." The first few weeks of Grace's return are tentative, like a dance where everyone is learning new steps. Richard makes an effort to be home more, to participate in Emma's evening routine, to show Grace the respect and appreciation he should have demonstrated from the beginning. Grace maintains professional boundaries while still giving Emma the love and attention she needs, walking a careful line between her role as employee and her obvious affection for the little girl. Emma blooms under Grace's renewed attention, but she's also more clingy than before, as if she's afraid that too much distance might make Grace disappear again. She insists on hugging Grace goodbye each morning and hello each afternoon, on including her in bedtime stories, on constant reassurance that Grace isn't going anywhere. She's processing the abandonment, Grace explains to Richard one evening after Emma has gone to bed. They're in the kitchen, Grace preparing Emma's lunch for the next day, while Richard pretends to review work emails. Children who've experienced loss can be very sensitive to changes in their routine or support system. Richard nods, struck by Grace's insight into child psychology. You studied this, didn't you? Child development. Bachelor's degree in early childhood education from Howard. Grace confirms. I was planning to get my master's and work in educational administration, but then Marcus was born and my husband died, and plans change. It's the most personal information Grace has shared since returning, and Richard realizes how little he actually knows about her life outside of his mansion. Marcus is your son, 8 years old, smart as a whip and determined to be an astronaut or a chef depending on the day. You've never mentioned him before. Grace gives him a look that's part amusement, part incredulity. Richard, in the 18 months I worked for you before, you never asked. You never asked about my family, my background, my education, my goals, my dreams. The criticism is delivered without heat, as a simple statement of fact, but it hits Richard like a physical blow. She's right. In all the time Grace worked for his family, he never once inquired about her life beyond these walls. "I'd like to know now," he says quietly. "About Marcus, about you, about your life, if you're willing to share." Grace studies his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether his interest is genuine. Whatever she sees must satisfy her, because she sets down the sandwich she's making and leans against the counter. Marcus is in 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary. He's reading at a 6th grade level but struggles with math, loves science experiments, and hates Brussels sprouts. He wants to meet Emma someday, but he's shy around new people and worried that rich kids won't want to be friends with him. Emma would love to meet him. Richard says immediately. She asks about your family sometimes, wonders why you never bring Marcus here. Because I learned early in my career that employers don't usually want their homes invaded by their employees' children. Grace replies. Professional boundaries, you know? The gentle sarcasm in her voice makes Richard wince. Things are different now. I'm different now. Or I'm trying to be. I've noticed. Grace returns to making Emma's lunch, but her posture is less guarded than it was moments before. The question is whether different is sustainable, or whether you'll revert to old patterns when the guilt wears off. It's a fair question, and Richard doesn't have an easy answer. Change is hard, especially changing beliefs and biases that have been ingrained since childhood. But watching Emma's joy at having Grace back, seeing the way his daughter has blossomed again under Grace's care, gives him motivation he's never had before. "Emma asked me something the other day," he says. "She wanted to know why I was scared of you." Grace goes very still. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I was scared of things I didn't understand, and that fear made me make bad decisions." "And what is it you didn't understand?" Richard takes a deep breath, preparing to voice thoughts he's been grappling with for weeks. "I didn't understand that love doesn't follow the rules I was raised with. I didn't understand that someone could care for Emma as deeply as you do without having any ulterior motive. I didn't understand that your background, your race, your economic status, none of that has anything to do with your character or your capacity to love my daughter." Grace nods slowly. "And now you do understand those things?" "I'm learning. I'm trying to unlearn 42 years of unconscious bias and replace it with actual knowledge of who you are as a person. It's going to take more than a few weeks of good behavior, Richard. This kind of change, if it's real, takes time and effort and constant self-examination. I know, but I have to try. For Emma and for you and for myself." Grace finishes wrapping Emma's sandwich and places it in the refrigerator. When she turns back to Richard, her expression is thoughtful. "Emma asked me something too, you know. She wanted to know if I forgave you." Richard's heart stops. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that forgiveness is a process, not a moment. That some hurts take time to heal, but that doesn't mean healing is impossible." She moves towards the kitchen door, then pauses. "For what it's worth, Richard, I think you're trying. That's more than a lot of people would do." After she leaves, Richard sits alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a life that Grace has made warmer and more complete. He's been given a second chance, but he understands now that earning it will be the work of months and years, not days and weeks. The transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it happens steadily, like ice melting under spring sun. Richard begins joining Emma and Grace for dinner more often, asking about their day listening to Emma's chatter about school and friends. He starts coming home earlier, not because he has to, but because he wants to be part of the warm, domestic scene that unfolds each evening in his kitchen. 3 months after Grace's return, Richard makes a decision that surprises even himself. "I'd like to meet Marcus," he tells Grace one evening. "Emma's been asking about him, and I think it would be good for both of them to meet." Grace pauses in loading the dishwasher. "Are you sure? Marcus is a good kid, but he's also 8 years old and black and from a very different world than Emma. Some of your neighbors might have opinions. Let them have opinions," Richard says with a firmness that surprises them both. "My daughter wants to meet your son, and I want Emma to have friends who expand her world, not just confirm her existing experiences." The playdate happens the following Saturday. Marcus arrives, clutching Grace's hand, eyes wide as he takes in the sterling mansion with its soaring ceilings and expensive artwork. He's a beautiful child, with Grace's intelligent eyes and a gap-toothed smile that transforms his serious face when Emma bounds down the stairs to greet him. "Hi, I'm Emma. Grace talks about you all the time. Do you want to see my room? I have a microscope and we can look at bugs." Marcus's shyness melts under Emma's enthusiastic welcome, and within minutes they're racing upstairs, their laughter echoing through the halls. Richard and Grace follow more slowly, both smiling at the easy way their children have connected. They spend the afternoon in the backyard, the children splashing in the pool while Richard and Grace sit in the shade, talking in a way they never have before. Grace tells him about her late husband, a teacher who died in a car accident when Marcus was 2. Richard shares memories of Sarah, stories about their courtship and marriage, and the dreams they'd had for Emma's future. "Sarah would have loved you," Richard says at one point, watching Emma teach Marcus to do a handstand in the shallow end. "She always said that love was the only thing that mattered in the end, that everything else was just noise." As the afternoon wears on, Richard finds himself relaxing in a way he hasn't in years. The children's joy is infectious, and Grace's presence brings a peace to his home that he'd forgotten was possible. When Mrs. Henderson waves from her garden next door, Richard waves back without tension. When a car slows down as it passes his house, the driver craning their neck to see the interracial gathering in his backyard, Richard meets their gaze steadily and without shame. This is his family now, complicated and unconventional and built on foundations that took trauma to reveal. But it's his, and it's real, and it's worth defending. The real test comes in November, when Richard's mother Sandra flies in from Florida for Emma's 7th birthday party. Sandra Sterling is old Connecticut money, the kind of woman who wears pearls to the grocery store and has never met a social boundary she didn't reinforce. She takes one look at Grace and Marcus at the birthday party and pulls Richard aside. "Richard, darling, I think we need to talk about the situation, with the help." Richard looks across the backyard where Grace is organizing a treasure hunt for Emma and 7 of her classmates, a mix of children that represents every shade of brown and beige and cream, all united in their excitement about hidden prizes and birthday cake. What situation would that be, Mother? Don't be obtuse. You know exactly what I mean. That woman is acting far too familiar, and having her son here mixing with Emma's proper friends, well, it's sending mixed messages about appropriate social boundaries. The words hang in the air between them, and Richard feels the familiar tug of old loyalties, old expectations, old fears. This is the voice that shaped his childhood, the worldview that taught him to see difference as threat. But then Emma's laughter cuts through his thoughts, bright and joyful, as she finds a hidden treasure and calls for Grace to see. Marcus is beside her, equally excited, and Grace is beaming with pride at both children. "Mother," Richard says quietly, "Grace is not the help. She's family. And if you can't see that, if you can't treat her with the respect and dignity she deserves, then you're not welcome in my home." Sendra's face goes through several shades of shock and outrage. "Richard Sterling, I am your mother. You cannot speak to me this way." "I can and I am. I love you, Mother, but I won't have Emma growing up thinking that the kind of prejudice you're displaying is acceptable. Grace has shown more love and care for Emma than most blood relatives ever could, and her son is a wonderful boy who makes Emma happy. That's all that matters to me." The confrontation ends with Sandra leaving early, muttering about political correctness and not knowing how I raised such a foolish son. Richard watches her taxi disappear down the driveway and feels not regret but relief. He's chosen his family, chosen love over fear, chosen growth over comfort. When he turns back to the party, Grace is watching him from across the yard. She doesn't say anything, doesn't acknowledge what she obviously overheard, but something in her expression has shifted. The wariness that's been present since her return has softened into something warmer, more trusting. That evening, after the last guest has gone home, and Emma has fallen asleep surrounded by birthday presents, Richard and Grace sit on his back patio, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars appear in the clear November sky. "Thank you," Grace says quietly. "For what? For choosing us, for standing up to your mother, for becoming the man Emma needs you to be." Richard swirls the wine in his glass, considering his words carefully. "I didn't choose you, Grace. You chose us, over and over again, even when I gave you every reason to walk away. All I did was finally get smart enough to appreciate the gift I'd been given." They sit in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the past year settling around them like a familiar blanket. The journey from that terrible day in March to this peaceful November evening has been fraught with mistakes and misunderstandings, with hurt feelings and hard-won growth. "Emma asked me something today," Grace says eventually. She wanted to know if we were a real family now, or still just pretending. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that families aren't always made the traditional way. Sometimes they're made by people who choose to love each other, even when it's complicated and difficult, and doesn't look like what other people expect." Richard nods, understanding the truth of this in ways he couldn't have imagined a year ago. His family doesn't look like the families he grew up around, doesn't fit the mold his mother would prefer, doesn't follow the script he thought he was supposed to follow. But it's real, and it's his, and it's built on a foundation of love that has survived the worst tests he could put it through. "We're real," he says finally. "All of us. We're as real as any family has ever been. Above them, the stars shine down on a house that finally feels like a home, on a man who learned to see past his own prejudices, on a woman who chose forgiveness over bitterness, and on two children who never doubted that love was stronger than the boundaries adults try to build around it. In the end, Richard Sterling discovers that's all any family really needs. Love strong enough to survive its own imperfections, and the courage to keep choosing each other day after day, year after year, no matter what the world might think about their unconventional constellation of hearts.